As Lynn said, my name is Bhan Gatkuoth, and I have the honor of introducing you to the next set of panelists and speakers. And we're gonna have a discussion about the people who make clean energy transitions possible, and that's the workers and the laborers. These are four incredible women who are strong thinkers and movers in thinking through policy and actionable elements of work that we can all do together to support workers who are learning and growing and advancing really, really important work. And without their efforts, none of the things we're talking about are possible. So please join me in welcoming our speakers today. Hello. Great. So I think we'll pass these mics down. Yeah. Perfect. So what I'm going to first do is get these wonderful ladies to introduce themselves to you. Maybe we'll start all the way over there with Serena.
I feel like all of you are probably sick of me by now. But Scano, Srinini Gaso, Gakonori Okwenzode, Ochiniga Shautan, Oswegon, Doagatigu. Hi everyone, my name is Serena Mondisabel. I'm Cayuga Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River, so about an hour southwest of Toronto. I'm also Panamanian on my dad's side, so south of the medicine line. We like to think about the eagle and the condor prophecy with that one. I am the prophet, I'm just kidding. Just some context of where I come from. Within Six Nations, I've grown up on the territory my whole life, and I have been exposed to the resilience and the efforts of my people to protect our territories. And since I was 8 years old, we actually had a land conflict in our community when I was 8 years old, and it was called Gunestado, and our people, our hereditary chiefs, went out of their way to protect our land and were criminalized for it. And so this is what I grew up, the backdrop. I grew up in the backdrop of my people being criminalized for protecting the land, and I think that's really what's informed me. My family still deals with the repercussions today of standing on the front lines. And so a lot of the work that I come into with climate justice and clean energy and a just transition is rooted in my people's strength and my people's power in protecting who we are as Haudenosaunee and protecting our territories. Yeah.
Hello, hello. Just in case anyone doesn't remember me, my name is Grace Nakamiak, and I'm the Clean Energy Coordinator for the Paulatuck Energy Working Group. And the working group is made up with local representatives from our Hunters and Trappers Committee, our Elders Committee, our Community Corporation, and our Hamlet Council. So our project is entirely community-led, and yeah. Also recently appointed board of directors at Indigenous Clean Energy.
Hadith and Hunzu, Spoozy, Janella Point, Stella Den Incas, Luxiliu Asli, Abba and Renee Lapointe, Alu and Michelle Baker, Atsu and Emma Baker, Atsien and Willie Baker. Hello everyone, my name is Janella Point. I am from Stellarton First Nation, located in the northern interior of BC. I am Caribou Clan, and as part of protocol was just acknowledging my parents and my matrimonial grandparents. My grandmother Emma is a Gatkuoth elder, a language teacher, a badass, and acknowledging my grandfather, the late Willie Baker, who is a Black and Choctaw man from New Mexico State. I also come into this work really moved by the resiliency of my people. My community is located in an area that has, been extracted by several industries over and over, and has also been the site of a lot of frontline fights. So yeah, I came into this work really motivated about the things that we were fighting against, and now after a few years of doing climate justice work, I'm really motivated by the things that we're fighting for. And so, yeah, really proud to be here representing the 7th-Gen Youth Council. My day job is also at the David Suzuki Foundation, where I work as a senior advisor, working specifically on an Indigenous strategic approach. And I'm also just a community organizer, a movement builder, someone that takes a lot of lessons from movements internationally to think about how we're working towards a new future and a new economy for our people. Alexei.
Hello, bonjour everyone. My name is Vanessa Corkle. I'm so honored to be sitting along these rad ladies today. I am originally from Treaty 6 territory, Saskatoon, and I'm currently based in what is now known as Ottawa. I'm Chilean Canadian, and that informs a lot of the way I've approached my work on climate change, as well as the time I spent living in Whitehorse when I was younger. And certainly brought me to care a lot about these issues through that work. I currently work as a senior policy advisor for Natural Resources Canada, forgive me, this is gonna be a mouthful, with the Sustainable Jobs Secretariat. And I will tell you more about the work that we're doing on sustainable jobs and just transition in a moment. But suffice to say that it's been an interesting circuitous route to come to work in government. I started working on environmental issues through media and documentary. I eventually did my master's, started working on advocacy, actually did a lot of partnership work with Pembina, which was a lot of fun, and did a lot of lobbying. And now I work for the team I used to lobby, which is great, because I think there's been a recognition that people from outside government and their lived experience and their knowledge from working more directly with communities and industry can bring a lot of expertise into the policy world, but I've also learned a lot about some of the challenges that you don't necessarily see outside government in terms of how to move policy forward, so that's been really fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks all four of you. I think it's really nice to hear your backgrounds and some of the reasons that you are so eager to advance and achieve a just transition, which is, what this next question is really all about. As you can kind of tell, these four women are coming from really different perspectives and experiences. And so I think one of the first questions that I'd like to ask all of you is what the concept of a just transition means to you and how it can be achieved in the ways that you're thinking about it. So maybe we'll go the other direction.
Sure. So I'm going to start at 20,000 feet and then come down, which is because we're working from a policy perspective. So for those of you that might be less familiar with the term just transition, it originally was coined by the labor movement about 30, 40 years ago, because unions and workers wanted to be represented and their needs addressed as we transition to a green economy. So now at the international level, in the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, as well as in other fora like the International Labour Organization, this is a defined term. And I won't go through all the details, but I think the principles at the high level are still applicable at the base level, at the community level. And some of those things are, I have my notes here. So one of them is making sure that our green economy is fair and inclusive. Another is this concept of decent work, that workers should have access to good quality, well-paid, stable jobs. Another is that we should leave no one behind. We want to make our economies more inclusive than they were. And then another one is this really critical component called social dialogue, which is a technical term, but really what it means is this can't be government leading things on their own, and it can't be industry doing things on their own. We really need to collaborate. So that term of social dialogue is how do we bring all our partners and stakeholders together? And in the Canadian context, when we're talking about industry, labor, and governments, Indigenous governments are a key part of that dialogue. So that's the international thing. And then in Canada, we have what's called the Sustainable Jobs Act, which was passed in June 2024. I like to brag a little bit that Canada is actually the only country that has standalone just transition legislation, so it's actually a really big deal. And what we've done through that legislation is we've taken those international principles and applied them in the Canadian context. So if you look at the law, it lists some of those guiding principles out. Things like making sure that our approach to net zero supports workers and communities by taking an inclusive approach, by making sure our approaches and our policies address local and regional needs. One of my favorite principles that's in the legislation is that we should account for the cultural values and strengths of the communities, which I think is really important when we're talking about Indigenous communities. So I won't go too long about the law right now, but I think it's quite an exciting piece of work that took a long time for many organizations, labor movement to push for that to happen. There was a lot of political coalitions that also caused that law to move forward, and now we have this really amazing piece of legislation that forces us to actually create plans for workers and communities.
Maybe we'll go to you, Janelle.
Yeah, thank you. I think my mind's going to probably stay at 20,000 feet. I think that's just like how my mind maps these kind of questions. I agree with what a lot was said. I think it's, essentially moving away from these extractive economies in a way that can prioritize Indigenous rights, community power, care for the land, and, not just about shifting our energy, but really shifting power, shifting decision-making power, and really centering those who are most impacted by the climate crisis, by colonialism and capitalism. And I think it also, has to involve some truth-telling about the perpetrators of the climate crisis and the ways those industries have profited from it. And I know that a just transition, for me, can't be about doing business as usual, because right now, in real time, I think we're witnessing the negative impacts of business as usual. So it's really important for me as we transition to this new energy, we're not just using the same systems with a new energy source. And I think my flags start to go up when we focus the just transition too much on just like jobs and work without really challenging the current economic system we're under, because the truth is, and especially for young people, having a job in our current system is not enough. We're seeing that people are working extremely hard jobs to make food on the table, and we're still not able to enjoy some of the fruits of our labor like previous generations have. We're in a housing crisis, an economic crisis. And so I think about, a just transition, really needing to be about challenging our current economic structure and focusing this as an opportunity to build a new economic structure that's rooted in reciprocity and healing and self-determination, and really not allowing our current system to stifle our imagination and to be in that place of dreaming what this next phase of the economy can look like. And I think a lot about the words dignity and reciprocity and repairing our relationships to the land in that.
Beautiful. What about you, Grace? What's the concept of a just transition mean to you?
Yeah, so I'll kind of come in here from a community aspect, and I'm so beyond proud of the working group and our community's efforts to move towards a sustainable future and kind of catch up to par in other jurisdictions throughout the country. So, and I really think that comes in with treating traditional knowledge and Western knowledge equal, and respecting the livelihoods of who we are as Indigenous peoples. I'm going to keep things a little bit short.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And Serena?
Yeah, thank you. I am listening to all of you. I'm like, yeah, all of that's a just transition. It's so all encapsulating and interconnected to each other. I forgot to mention when I was introducing myself, because I really love my community, I usually position myself that way. I'm the managing director at Sacred Earth Solar. We're an Indigenous women-led nonprofit that advances a just transition away from colonial extractivism. So at work, we eat, breathe, and live just transition. And so when I think of just transition, let's look at the term. Just comes from the term justice. What does justice mean? Justice means to seek justice means that it seeks to ensure fairness and to uphold rights. So when we look at a just transition is rooted in a justice framework. And when I think about upholding rights as part of this justice framework, the first thing that comes to my mind is self-determination, and the right for us as Ungwehoe people to have self-determination. I also think, as Janelle touched on, a just transition is recognizing that colonization extractivism, and capitalism have created the climate crisis as well as social injustice. And that Indigenous rights, Indigenous leadership, and Indigenous solutions and sovereignty are the pathway to a constructive path forward. And so with how we work at Sacred Earth Solar, we really look at a just transition as this product of an intersection between clean energy, food security work, and climate justice. And we can't really see them siloed within this transition. I think a big part of a just transition is this transition away from fossil fuels to climate solutions. And so really looking at that deadly diesel that Chris Henderson was talking about. But while we're doing that, we must prioritize social justice and equity within this transition to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I think currently, and I think some of us in this room might need some reflecting, because I currently think in a lot of these spaces, we're reducing ourselves and limiting ourselves to this approach of carbon reductionism. And when I really look at carbon reductionism, I really think this transition is not solely about quantifying and reducing carbon emissions. And as Hoodwinked in the Hothouse has said, the climate crisis is not a puzzle to solve by counting carbon. And so for me, when I think of a just transition, it is this process of healing, this recognition of colonialism, and the return to our original structures as humans on this earth, as ones who are interconnected and in relation to everything around us. And I also think it's the return and the upholding and maintenance of our caretaking with the land for ourselves, for our families, for our clans, for our communities, and for our territories. What a just transition is to build safe, comfortable, healthy livelihoods and to build thriving economies. And I think a lot of the talk that I have at a lot of these conferences is we're always thinking of the future. We're talking about emerging technologies, and yes, that's all valid. But when I think of a just transition, I think of the past, and I think of my ancestors, and I think of the way that they were living before. They didn't have electricity. They had all their food. Grace still has all her hunts and dries her meat. That's a just transition too. And I think when we think about this just transition, because a lot of us are here on the energy transition, but the term just transition, it's rooted in so much more than renewable energy. It's beyond renewable energy. I think about my little brother, and he's currently in language immersion back home, learning our Mohawk language. He is a just transition. I think of my mom who brought the language back into our lives 16 years ago. She is the just transition. I think of her doing social work in our community, trying to abolish and reform child welfare. That is the just transition. It is all interconnected, and I wanted to give a shout out to the Yukon Climate Action Youth Fellowship that was based in this area, and they really focused on not losing ourselves within this focus of carbon reductionism, but looking at it at a holistic manner of wellness, of health, of care for each other, of social services, and it's all interconnected, because if the land's unhealthy, we're unhealthy too. And so a just transition to me is coming back into that relationship with Mother Earth, and I think of Yetanistoa Hunja, which is our translation for Mother Earth, and it means our mother, she provides for us. So what are we doing for her? Thank you.
Can I jump in on that a little bit? Just because I love everything you just said, Serena, and I think it feels really overwhelming to let ourselves be in that dream space and to let ourselves think about a just transition holistically. But it's so critical, because we know the transition away from our old extractive industries are bound to happen and are happening globally. And I think we really have a power of Indigenous people, because we have hundreds from coast to coast to coast with all the different First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We have hundreds of economic and governance systems and cultural and language and values that have allowed us to be the only people that have survived sustainably on these lands. So I really think, at the core of a just transition is about how we're reclaiming those systems, and we're making the transition fit into our systems, and not just being, tagged along into the clean energy systems and forced to kind of think into these limited factors of our current system. So I just wanted to, shout out how important it is to think about this holistically. And even though it may be daunting, that imagination space is really what's going to make the transition just, because the transition is inevitable.
I don't know how I'm supposed to make it through the rest of this panel without crying. But thank you. I think something that each of you have really reinforced in your contributions to this question is that a just transition is not, it's not a buzzword. There are actionable items that exist here, and there's work to be done to not only facilitate a transition, but let a transformation take hold. And I really appreciate so much of what each of you have said here. I think moving from concept to on-the-ground applicability, I'd like to ask some questions about what this looks like for workers and communities at the ground level. And so my first question here is, how do we support community members in accessing jobs in this clean energy transition?
Me? Well, I think there's many different things that we can be doing. And I really think around, as I mentioned, self-determination. And so when you're leading projects, I think a lot of the time, and I was actually talking with someone today, when it comes to funding proposals and working, like when we're doing projects, usually only capital is included within a lot of these grants, and how much funding is actually provided for capacity building. Because at the core of each of these projects, the first step you should really be doing is community visioning. And so when you do this community visioning process, you're thinking, okay, is one of our objectives to hire locally and to provide more jobs for the workforce? And I think about this, I can't really tell you the community that we're working with right now because we haven't launched our RFP yet, but we're doing a 1.5 megawatt solar project in Alberta. And right before we launched our RFP, there's a big portion of the RFP that actually focuses on a participation plan, and we'll hire someone within community that will be solely dedicated to the project to focus on where can we include community member participation in all steps of the project. So when we launch this RFP, it will go out and all bidders, all contractors, and those potential partners that we will work with will know exactly what our key objective is, and it's to build capacity in the community. And I think that's something really easy for us to do. A lot of us probably in the room have worked on many RFPs, and how are we making sure that that's a key priority? And I think within accessing the jobs, I think about capacity building too, beyond making sure. So once we can do that within the RFP, we can make sure there's jobs. Okay, how are people actually going to maintain these jobs? How are people going to feel like they're secure enough to work in these jobs? And I think that's been mentioned a lot within the youth panel yesterday with the youth environmental circle of oh, I don't know enough. I don't know. I don't feel confident. And I think it really comes back to this investment. Okay, we can create jobs, but people aren't working in them. But are we actually investing in community? And I think about my own community of Six Nations. Our community energy champion isn't from the community. She is from a neighboring city. She has been invested in. She's taken the Catalyst program. She's got all these different opportunities. I really like her, so this is not on her. This is more on the structures in place. And she didn't have prior experience within this field. So I think about that and I think, why couldn't you have done the same with someone in our community? And I'm not gonna take the excuse that, there's not enough people. We have 28,000 members in Six Nations. There's enough people. I am one of those people. I've had to go outside of the community to find work that really aligns with my passion. And I actually probably won't work in the community because my friend Carol and I were talking about this. One, we have a really difficult division of power within Six Nations between our hereditary governance and our band council that doesn't recognize our hereditary system as the entitled right holders. And so this right there, it's if we work for the band, can we even be Haudenosaunee? But also just simple stuff where we talk about there's not competitive wages because we're tax exempt. There isn't fair benefits because we have NIHB. So we're having to go outsource. We don't really have always pension programs. And so and we're kept on contract as well. So we're having to go outside of the community, and that's personally why I don't want to work in community. We also don't have a diversification of workforce in the community. So we have one community energy champion job, and that's it. Or you want to work at the Development Corporation, but you need an MBA. that doesn't sound right to me. And so I think when we're talking about accessing jobs in community, we need to provide competitive wages, fair benefits. We need to make sure that there's this diversification. I work in nonprofit, it feels good, but we can have, as I said earlier today, we have all these different roles. Why don't we have nonprofits? We can focus on policy, we can focus on governance, we can focus on the technical, the engineers. And Six Nations, like, we should be able to do that. We have the world at our fingertips right there. Toronto's just an hour away. And I think the last thing I want to say on that is, how are we defining a good job? How are we defining? Because at the end of the day, to me, a good job doesn't mean a competitive wage. Am I happy? Am I healthy? Is this hard work? And so when we really look at the jobs in our community and having to deal with all these different intersections of politics and business, does it feel good? I'm not sure. And I think we currently are economic hostages in a lot of the situations around the workforce in our communities. And so that diversification is really important so we can diversify our own opportunities and really invest in ourselves. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to give the government answer, which is that I think, so right now we're in a really interesting time. I know that this was mentioned by Chris at the beginning of the conference, but we're seeing Canada-US issues kind of trickle in everywhere. And so when we talk about workforce development federally, we're also thinking about what are the sectors that we need to support that are also potentially going to be hit by tariffs? What are sectors that we can grow that will help our economies be more resilient? When it comes to what we've been talking about at this conference, so much of what we're doing here, what all of you are doing in this room, is rooted in energy security and local economies. But you need workers to be able to support those projects. And so I think one of the things we're doing now that we have the legislation is we have a mandate through that law, to create an action plan every 5 years, similar to the emissions reduction plan, where we outline how we're going to support workers to grow and upskill or reskill into those industries. So we're really at the point right now where we're gathering inputs in a lot of ways. And one of the key ways we're doing that is the legislation also creates an external advisory body to government called the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council. And this is where we're seeing that collaboration start to unfold in practice, which is there's members from industry, from labor, there are other experts. I think we have someone from a utility, we have someone from an environmental organization, and there's also dedicated slots for Indigenous members. We also have one Indigenous youth on our council, so it's very diverse. And the goal is for those experts to bring together their knowledge from their sectors and their lived experience to provide the government, or to provide the minister advice, on what's needed for a just transition. So in that policy development lifestyle, and this is now, as I am a civil servant having moved in from outside government, we really have to take into consideration not only the current political context, but also what all our different partners need. And we also have to kind of unlock what all those partners could do to contribute, right? So a lot of this is identifying how can we work and support the private sector to invest more in training, or when they're partnering with communities, how do you incent companies to put aside budget for apprenticeships, for example. So on the one hand, I think there's a lot of space for communities to ask for that when they're working with governments and with companies. On the other hand, I do think there's a space for industry to step up and for governments to think about what policies can really unlock those trainings. We have lots of programs that train people already. It's never enough. We know that. It's never enough. So how do we work together through things like the Sustainable Jobs Partnership Council to figure out how we can each contribute our own strengths, I think is really the key. And we're really at the start of that process right now.
How about you, Grace? How do we support community members in accessing good, clean energy jobs?
Perfect. So I'm just going based here off of experience and the morals and values that we have within the working group and within our community. And although our project is currently transitioning into pre-feed, we've always instilled to keep as much money as we can within the community, within our region, within our territory, and from there outsource. And and in terms of workforce, I'll give a little shout out again to Michael Ross and especially the NEI team. They've been absolutely wonderful in building capacity within the working group, within our community members, and especially within myself. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Maybe I'll pass it to Janelle.
Yeah, I think definitely, a focus on capacity building, education, training, membership, but also there's a need to be really intentional about removing some of the systemic barriers that we face as Indigenous people, and that could look like, addressing racism in the trades, or it could be making sure there's childcare available for mothers to participate in some of these programs, improving local infrastructure, things like that. But yeah, to not be repetitive, I also, I again, want to acknowledge that, the way that Indigenous people have been systemically excluded from the economy and systemically excluded from our political system was national and broad sweeping. The climate crisis we're facing now is certainly national, broad sweeping, affecting everyone. And so I also think our solutions and the way we're thinking about a just transition needs to be as well. And I know that Serena and I and other people in this room are big supporters of solutions like a youth climate corps that would guarantee all youth across this country to get a good, dignified job in their community that, is stable and connected to protecting the land. I know it's really hard for me to live in my community without compromising my values. And if there was a Youth Climate Corps, a broad national program that allowed anyone under 30 to do the work, there's so much work that needs to be done, from climate adaptation, mitigation, and just transition. There's certainly no shortage of work. If that was offered to me, I would be able to live and work in my community and be more connected to my land and my family. So I'm also, thinking about those broad sweeping policies that are starting to make headway within our national government, and certainly I would like to see continue.
I want to move on to another question and invite each of you to share some lessons learned that you're taking and seeing from within community as new projects and partnerships are built. Anyone want to start?
I'm happy to go ahead.
Sure.
There's been so many amazing examples brought up at this conference, and so many of you have heard of them. I'm just thinking, for example, the presentation from Tim's team about the Galena energy projects was a really a perfect case study of how someone who is working in a totally unrelated field can pivot and support energy transition in their community, and then support other people in their community to learn those skills. So when we're talking about government policy, at this level, we have to understand that the transition is really individual, right? Like each of us may be transitioning in our own work or transitioning the focus of our work. The fellow from ACCO that was here in this morning's panel was talking about the new skills that he had to learn. So I think it's how can we take those lessons from individual experiences and identify how could those people be better supported, or how do we replicate that in more than one community, and what are the levers that we can use politically or through policy to make those transitions more feasible for individuals and to empower communities to be able to train their own workforce, or it might be funding for climate action coordinators, or it might be other mechanisms like where you work with a company to develop a community benefit agreement where they do certain things to commit to working with the community. So there's all sorts of solutions, and we've seen them here at this conference over the past few days. I think one of the key questions is how do we replicate what's working, and where can governments help to do that? And when I say governments, I don't just mean the federal government, but the provincial, territorial governments, municipal governments all have a role to play, both to work with each other and with local communities and stakeholders as well. Because it can't be a top-down approach. There's no one-size-fits-all for just transition, and to really support communities to achieve their own visions, there have to be local solutions. So it's a matter of identifying what kind of supportive policies can support those local solutions.
What about you, Janelle? What are some lessons you're learning from community?
Yeah, I think I'm learning, just how excited and willing my community is to work towards a just transition, how excited people are to finally have a voice and a seat at a table, and the acknowledgement that real change now happens when Indigenous communities can be full partners on these projects. But I'm also learning, how easy it is to fall back on old patterns when we're really still at a point where we're fighting this crisis incrementally. I know my community has just been awarded a wind project under the province's recent call for power, and people are so proud and excited. We had elders go out to the site, which was an old berry picking patch we use, and it's perfect for a wind project. But I'm disappointed to realize that that project is still going to go towards net zeroing extractive industries like the LNG industry, and not actually provide power to communities that need it, especially after the years of really scary drought conditions that we faced in the province of BC. And so, I still think there's a long way to go to make the way we engage with Indigenous communities the new norm, and still a long way to go towards what I would call a just transition, but really still inspired by the pride people are taking in being a part of a just transition.
Yeah, so I won't necessarily speak too much to lessons learned, but I will add to some challenges. So over in the Northwest Territories, we have all of these goals that we want to reach, but we currently don't have any policies or programs in place for the communities, the governments, regions to reach these targets. And not only that, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the capacity within the government, within the communities. There are other many pressing challenges that we have to face already within the North. And, it is unfortunate when communities do prioritize efforts like this, and have full support from all stakeholders. But the challenge is finding the common ground for policy, funding, etc.
Yeah, real reinforcement of a long way to go. Yeah. Yeah, Serena, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've been kind of working in clean energy since I was a teenager, so I was just a child. I needed to come back for a summer job, so I came back to my community Six Nations from university. And I guess this kind of starts with the challenges I face as a young person. So I was working on the consultations, the community engagement for our projects at the Development Corporation. And the Development Corporation, if you don't know, Six Nations has the largest clean energy portfolio of any First Nation in the country. We have 1,600 megawatts. And their mission is to advance a healthy future. So I was excited. I was like, yay, sounds so good. This is very values aligned. But then I had to work on a consultation for the Niagara Reinforcement Line. And the Niagara Reinforcement Line was a 76-kilometer double circuit line that was going from Niagara to around our community that would be able to transmit around 800 megawatts of clean energy. But it was crossing through some of our territory that had our medicines and some sacred land. And so my people right away were like, nah, we're not recommissioning this. We don't want that. And stood on business, really. And I feel like that's just Haudenosaunee people in general, but and it really made me think, okay, yeah, like they were positioning this and as really exciting and really amazing for the community, and oh, it'll bring revenue back. But my community didn't want it. They didn't feel proud. They didn't have pride, agency, or hope around this project. And so right there, that made me look at things differently. And Hydro One ended up pulling an injunction on my people. So if we were to go to the site, we would have been criminalized. This is the reality for a lot of what happens in our territory. The utility will go to the court system and get an injunction on our people. It ended up going through because we decided we didn't have the efforts or the legal capacity to further this battle, and it's still continuing today. And I think that really changed my scope of what I really wanted to work on, and a lesson I learned was that's not a just transition. An energy transition is not a just transition, and we're seeing this even today in my community. There's a 250 megawatt Oneida energy storage project, and I'm not against energy storage. I think it's the best alternative we have right now, especially for a lot of the communities in remote spaces, and especially in Ontario, where we have a lot of renewable energy and this diversification of our energy mix happening, because we have a lot of peak power. How are we storing that? So I get it. But does the rest of my community get it? Do they have the same information? I have access to you guys, I have access to these spaces, I have access to the networks. They don't have that same access. And so when they came to announce, Christia Freeland and Doug Ford came to announce the project, they locked my community members out. Children had to go to the bathroom, and they couldn't go in the building. And that's the reality of these projects that are happening in our community. And I think that's just, I really thought, when I thought about this lesson, what is Creator trying to tell me? And it comes back to community, and it comes back to self-determination. And so a lesson I learned is I'm gonna do things differently. As a young person, I have an obligation to do things differently. And so I looked at the governance in our community. We have a strong hereditary system. I said, let's do a project. Let's do decision-making through our clans like we always have. We were the first project to use our clans in decision-making for a project. I said, let's invest in our people. We trained over 20 people in solar installation and design. They built that system themselves. They also were trained in operations and maintenance. They will be maintaining that system for its 20-year lifespan. And I also, before we got into the solar part, we are looking at energy efficiency. And I think that's a really big, easy part to get into community. And Chad said it the other day with demand-side management. People can understand it. We have housing. It's easy to really, I think, be relatable for people and understand when it comes to the health and well-being. And that was a lesson, is we need to start at energy efficiency. We're talking about critical rare earth minerals, and there's a lot of issues around extractivism continuing. Well, how are we gonna address that? We're gonna mine less because we're gonna use less energy. And so a big part of that lesson too is let's start there, because people will resonate more when it's not about profit, but it's around cost savings, and it's around health, and it's around comfort. And that's what projects should be. And I guess the last lesson that I just really learned is it's free, prior, and informed consent. It's listening to our communities. If we want to push projects forward, you damn as well be getting consent on that project, because it is not a just transition without it. And I won't stand by. We could have the coolest projects ever, but if our community says no, it's not going through. So that's just some of the lessons I've learned in this is, what does a just transition mean? And it means coming from the ground up, and it means making sure that we are involved in all decision making, but also we're the ones leading projects that resonate with who we are as Haudenosaunee people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from so much of what each of you said, we really get a sense of just how much work needs to be done to really facilitate, workers' rights, to really facilitate a transition that supports communities, supports people in effective ways, and rejects, poor methods of the past that really are not that helpful to people. So I guess along those lines, I want to ask this next question, which is, how do we hold companies accountable to local communities and ensure that the benefits of resource and energy projects are distributed fairly?
Yeah, I can start. I want to talk about holding these companies accountable. I think we need clear agreements, transparent reporting, and legal mechanisms. And I'm a grassroots organizer and I'm a movement builder first. And I think, unfortunately, in this country, we have not built enough political power to really force consequences for these companies if they exploit people. And that's totally evident in the stories that Serena just shared with us. After surviving over 150 years of colonization, which again included systemic impoverization of Indigenous people, exclusion from the economic system, unfortunately, we can't just rely on goodwill, and we need enforceable rights both through our traditional systems, but also for the government to stand up as good partners and have those enforceable rights and oversight, so that communities can engage in these partnerships without this really egregious power imbalance that has been created over the last century plus. And so, yeah, I think we need the ability to engage in a real partnership when we want to do projects. But again, right now, as Serena really pointed out, if we want to get out of a project or say no to a project, the only options for us as Indigenous people are to put our bodies on the line and put our health and our physical, emotional, mental well-being at risk to stop these projects, or to engage in long, lengthy, expensive, very difficult legal battles to say no to these projects. So there's a million ways for corporations to force a project through, and only very limited and highly costly, highly draining ways for us to say no or to get out of a project. So that really needs to change, and we need some clear accountability structures that can come from our traditional systems and self-determination, but we also need, the government to stand up as partners and ensure that those loopholes can no longer be taken by corporations.
Thanks, Janelle. It was really some interesting and important points. I think federally, we're in an election period, and so I think the direction that the government will take on many policies, including on sustainable jobs, is yet to be determined. We don't know how the next few weeks are going to unfold, but I can speak to some really interesting research that we've done on policies elsewhere that have really made a difference in those jurisdictions. And so one of those pieces. And it's interesting because even though Canada is a global north country, I think we have a lot to learn from global south countries. So for example, South Africa has, and this isn't specific to energy or net zero, but they have a Black-based Economic Empowerment Act, which actually, there's mechanisms to make sure that there's Black representation in certain businesses. Norway has a similar regulation where for boards of companies above a certain size, they have to have a certain level of women representation on boards. So there's all sorts of concepts that you can think about, how could we apply that in the Canadian context or in a provincial or a territorial context to improve representation for some of those decision making. So that's some things that we've been looking at for inspiration. And then another thing, and this is from the United States, and so we know that many of those policies are currently being dismantled, but there's still some really amazing lessons to be learned from the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of the money that was spent and earmarked in the Inflation Reduction Act had requirements for companies to either hire a certain number of local employees or develop, or there was environmental justice requirements. Some of you might be familiar with the Justice 40 initiative. So it wasn't specific to Indigenous peoples, but it included tribal communities, as they're called in the United States by the government, as well as people of color and people with disabilities and other underrepresented groups, so they could be included in projects, as well as a requirement in certain cases, and this has also been done in California and New York at the state level, is to require companies investing in renewable energy, in some cases other projects, infrastructure projects as well, that they have to sign a legal agreement with the local community that outlines the benefits that community is going to get from the project. And in some cases, that also includes the requirement to do best practice community engagement. And I want to hone in on that engagement piece to kind of respond to what was mentioned before, is that when you look at the evidence in terms of how long it takes to get projects done and how much it costs to bring a project from the start to the end, often those engagement, if you don't do engagement properly, it makes the project more expensive in the long run, and it delays the project in the long run. And I think, there's a lot of people in industry that have clued into this, but there's a lot of people in industry and government that have not. And I think if we're able to really enable best practice community engagement and think about some tools we could use to do that, it will help improve community buy-in for the energy transition, help people see their own role and see their own benefits. And so as to how that will unfold federally, it's really hard to say, but I did want to highlight that there are some really promising examples out there of policies that have enabled that, that I think we can look to for inspiration.
Maybe I'll ask the same question to you, Grace. How do we hold companies accountable to local communities and ensure benefits of resource and energy projects are distributed fairly?
Oopsies. Yeah, so ways that we could hold the governments and industries accountable for incorporating all of these core values is there's actually so many documents out there that are literal guides to a just transition, which I'm going to keep this very short because I want Serena to speak to this. But there are so many guides, and there's so many guides, short documents on ways for this to be carried out. So I know I'll let Serena speak about the Just Transition Guide. But yeah, like also another shorter document. I had the privilege last October to attend an Indigenous Peoples Summit over in Geneva, Switzerland, and this was the topic. So I was very fortunate to have partaken in the development of the document. It's a 10-pager, so no long reading. Keep it short and simple for all the folks with the busy schedules. But yeah, we could distribute that, and it's literal principles on how to engage and interact with Indigenous peoples in developing renewable energy projects, developing mines. Yeah, I'll leave it at that because I want everyone to hear Serena, and she's absolutely amazing, and we'll save the last bit of time here for her.
Thank you, Grace. I want to give a shout out to Grace because we actually met through the 2020 Catalyst program. So Indigenous Clean Energy invested in us, and that's what we built that community together, and it's amazing that we have these relationships that really we can learn off each other, push each other further, and I think that's what makes it all really special, so I just wanted to say that. I'm going to be short and sweet here, and I think I'm kind of taking an imagination or reimagining approach to this question of I want us to get into a place where we're not reactive and we're proactive. I think at this point we shouldn't have to be holding companies accountable because we should be leading the projects. And so I really think about this concept. I've been toying with it the last couple of years around community-led versus First Nations owned. And I personally don't think all First Nations owned projects are community-led. I think a lot of the time proponents are coming to communities. We had the Feed and Tariff program in Ontario. People needed Indigenous participation in the project, so Six Nations gets a lot of bids, especially within the area we're in. Most of the projects, we have less than 50% ownership on the majority of our projects. I think there's 190%, and it's because it's on a community building. And so this is why my community isn't informed and doesn't know what's going on, because a lot of the time it's external developers and companies coming into our community and telling us, this is what we should do. This will be helpful. Oh, you'll get some money back. We actually had this recommissioning of a mine, one consultation around a recommissioning of a mine near a community. And I think it's gonna have like $40 million lifespan of the amount of money it'll bring in. Pretty sure we're getting 1.4 million of that if we were to sign on. Like, Six Nations is much richer than that. We honestly don't need the 1.4 if I'm being honest. But I think about this idea that if we switch to the community-led approach, where it's coming from the ground up, and I know a lot of you are community energy champions, and I know this is exactly why Indigenous Clean Energy and many other organizations exist, is to build that capacity from the ground up. And I think about the Catalyst program in this, and I think about how we look at building our energy team. We look at creating, like figuring out community engagement processes. We literally look at ourselves as the connector of all parts and making sure that community is upheld at the forefront. And I think it's really magical when the project comes from the ground up. And I also think that's why community energy planning is essential in communities. And not having an external consultant come and do it, but providing those skills for us to do it ourselves and to engage in our communities ourselves. Grace was just telling me a story of being in Greenland where some external developer was having to translate from Greenlandic to Danish to English, and everything was being lost in translation. And it was like, this happens a lot. It is all lost in translation, and our community's thoughts are lost in translation. So if we're building capacity, we're creating our own community energy plans, we're informing ourselves, we're informing the document, then the projects as will move forward, because we won't have us on the road shutting down a project. But if all else fails, we will do that, and we will exert our rights, because that's the only way people will listen. So yeah, that's the only thing I wanted to touch base on. And I think, really think about this idea of community-led versus First Nations owned. This is what we need to really think about in the context of projects. And I'll make one comment too. If you want to do First Nations owned project and it's self-determined that you want to do that and you don't really want to be involved, that's okay too, because it all comes down to self-determination. And if that feels good to you, want it like 10% and it'll bring equity in, that's fine too, as long as it's coming from the community and the needs and priorities of your people. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We have just a couple minutes left, so I think I'm just going to jump into a quick lightning round question for you all. In the room today, we have a diverse array of community clean energy leaders, government, industry, and media. And so I'm wondering if you have any direct recommendations, calls for actions, or resources that you feel the need to share before we exit the stage this afternoon. Maybe we'll start with you, Vanessa.
Sure. Lightning round. Okay. I was like, do a lightning round at the end, and now I'm like, I'm not ready. I think a key piece, and I'll say this being at Natural Resources Canada, where we are a dedicated unit working on workforce in a branch that's focused on energy, we have to start putting the conversation together of workers and economic development together, because sometimes these conversations, often they happen separately, right? We have governments that have different labor ministries and they have energy ministries. That's for good reason. But when we're talking about the energy transition and what we need to physically build to make this transition happen, we have to be thinking about workforce from the get-go. So if you're a company, think about when you're working on a project with a community, how can you bring that into the work you do to make it more socially sustainable? If you're a government, how do you bring those conversations together between a labor ministry and an energy ministry? If you're a community, how do you ask the right questions of the governments and industry that you're working with to get the support that you need? So I think just thinking about workforce from the get-go is really what we need to start doing. Janelle?
Okay. Yeah, 7Gen right now is doing the work to empower youth, the next generation of leaders, and what's really clear to me is that these youth get it. Serena was hosting a Just Transition workshop at our recent 7Gen summit that took place in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and all the youth in the room were so shy to speak because they were like, well, I don't really know what a policy is, and I don't really know Just Transition, but they innately started articulating what a just transition was better than like a lot of the adults I work with, just by thinking about things their grandmother told them or something their cousin did. And so, yeah, this is really an opportunity to invest in the youth. 7Gen will be hosting another summit this year, and I hope that we can count on your support to bring more youth together and to continue our awesome programming. And yeah, I also just wanted to shout out, we don't know what our next federal government is going to bring. In 2019, we knew that climate was our first priority. Since then, it's become health, it's become the economy. Now the number one election issue is probably going to be responding to these tariff threats and standing up to America. But we know, as articulating the just transition, that all of those things are interconnected. So encouraging people to take up that political power and vote for the people that are going to advance the just transition. and invest in the governance systems of the hundreds of Indigenous nations that exist from coast to coast to coast.
Yeah. I think this is also, as mentioned, this is like the perfect opportunity to reach out for an ask. And I'd hope I indirectly mentioned earlier about the lack of policies in place, but and as things are most recently are really narrowing down onto Canadian sovereignty, Arctic sovereignty, and military defense, but invest in that, but also please invest in the rural and remote communities that were there first. Thank you.
Hell yeah! I did a panel a couple of weeks ago where I actually thought through this, and so that's why I had to bring my phone out, because there's 3 things I think that I would think are essential. One is to democratize energy governance. So we need to reform utilities and regulators to include Indigenous peoples, youth, frontline community voices. We need to create local community energy boards, participatory budgeting processes, and climate assemblies around this topic. We also need to make climate data and decision-making transparent and accessible. And so that's what I would say around energy governance. I would also say that we need to invest in community-led, community-owned, and worker-led energy. So we need to redirect subsidies from fossil fuel companies to Indigenous-owned, cooperative, and community-led clean energy projects. And I think this is a big topic of what, going to Chris's session around the off-grid clean energy collaborative. Let's talk about that. How are we going to redirect those funds? We also need to prioritize local hiring, training, and ownership in green infrastructure bills, as well as what Janelle was saying, supporting youth-led pathways to green jobs. And last but not least, you guys probably already know I'm going to say this, we need to recognize and uphold Indigenous sovereignty. We must fully implement UNDRIP, but also recognize Indigenous people's inherent rights outside of UNDRIP and our own understanding of self-determination. We also need land back. I'm going to be honest here. We need to transfer control of lands, waters, and energy systems back to Indigenous nations, including revenue sharing and jurisdictional authority. And lastly, we need to support Indigenous-led clean energy projects, not just participation in colonial projects, but the ones that we're leading. And we need to do it all over. And we can see Grace as an amazing example of it happening in the north and happening in a remote community. Fund her project. She needs funds, right? Fund our projects. We are already leading the transition. And as Chris Henderson has said, we have 2,000, 3,000 Indigenous-led clean energy projects across the country. Let's bring that number up and let's increase it together. And we need all of us here to do so. So that is what I would think. And I'll give a quick shout out to my work. We have the Just Transition Guide at Sacred Earth Solar, and we're actually creating a Just Transition community-based training program so that we can bring it into communities so that it's accessible to all members. So if you want some of that, we're launching it soon and we can come to your community. Yeah. I'm giving it to you.
Well, great. I think that was a really nice note to end on. Thank you all for your preparation and bringing your brilliance to stage with us today. And I really encourage you all to reach out to each of these speakers here for more insight into the wealth of knowledge that they truly have. But we have this red light beeping at us, so we have to get off stage now. So one last round of applause for these speakers. Thanks.